So in this video, we are going to be rewriting my sophomore year resume. My sophomore year resume is essentially what I used after 2 years of school. So I already had 2 internships and I was recruiting for investment banking junior year internships. So I think this is really going to be helpful if you're a student in school, if you've had no formal kind of work experience yet, or if you've had no one to really properly review your resume. Now we do have a resume and cover letter course, which has all of my private equity and investment banking resumes in there, but this is just a helpful freebie so you understand the principles. So I'm gonna start with some very high level advice. I would say the first piece of advice is that bullet points should be detailed and they should articulate a clear, specific outcome. And that means you're not using vague or very general language. You want to focus on specific tasks you did, specific projects you worked on. The more specific, the better, because what you're really trying to do is give the reader of the resume a clear indication of what you did on the job. You also want to involve numbers wherever possible. This could be something like the amount of dollars invested, however much percentage you improved, whatever you can do to make that more tangible. Secondly, I would say is you want to focus on your technical work. Even if you were just an intern and you were assisting someone else with the actual deliverable, as long as you can speak to it, as long as you understand your role and how it impacted the work product, I think it's fair game to include it on your resume. Even when people get into first or second year banking, a lot of the times they're not actually going to have as much work experience as they put on their resume. So it's really finding a balance that is tactful, that is tasteful, and something that you can still speak to. And lastly, I'm just going to say you should have a very careful eye towards formatting consistency. Now, what this means is using the same headers throughout, using the same font throughout, making sure that all the bullets are aligned. And this seems really pedantic and really tedious, but it's probably the thing that people can catch the most in the industry. So with that being said, let's dive into Word and actually go through my old resume line by line. And then we're going to go through an edited, improved version of the resume to really show you how the changes might be incorporated. So here we are in the Word document for my old resume, and I have all the comments pertaining to potential issues or errors within the resume on the right-hand side. In terms of overall format, I would say that this is generally the scheme that I think most finance people are going to follow. It's just kind of the conventions that have been set over time. And what I really mean by that is that it should be one page. You're going to have these clear black headers. You can also see that these are kind of sectioned out into relatively intuitive buckets. We have education, experience, activities and interests, which kind of culminates the rest of the information. So let's tick through this one at a time. And one thing off the bat, and this is pretty crazy, but my font for my name is absurd. It's way too big. I would say reduce this to 24 to 28, and then honestly reduce the overall font size to maybe 11. Right now it is 12. I think that this single row capturing all of my kind of email and address is good. You don't want to spend too much space on this information. I think condensing it to one row is the right call. Next, we have education. I think if you're a student, you're going to have this education section first. That'll change over time once you get more legitimate work experience. Now you can see in this education section, I'm really just trying to include the most relevant information. So got to include your GPA, your grades. I would also just include maybe certifications or scholarships, or if you excel in a particular course, maybe if you were a TA for a specific class, anything that's directly related to your school can go here. So the meat of your resume is going to be experience. And a lot of the exercise when you're in college, or if you don't have a lot of industry experience yet, is determining what of value you still did, or what you contributed to on the job. Now, looking at the specific bullet points, what we're looking for is to try to have number values wherever possible. We want to have the most detailed bullet point possible that also points to a specific outcome. So one thing off the top, valuated, I would say, is not how people kind of describe this convention. I would just go with valued. I also thought this bullet point could be written a little bit more directly instead of saying and perform financial size up, which in itself is kind of a vague analysis to be describing. I think this bullet point, you can just focus it on the valuation component, talk about the DCF, talk about economic value added. And this is what I mean when I say highlight the outcome. I think it's a very good structure to have the first part of your bullet point talk about the analysis, talk about the thing that you did. And then the second part, often you can just use, a comma or a semicolon. You want to outline exactly what that led to. So this next bullet, one thing that I thought was that this is very strong language. The idea that a summer analyst would develop the company's operating model is pretty lofty. So maybe tone it down to assisted in development of. And the impact here is to determine 2013 to 2015 financing requirements. So again, similar structure. What was the analysis? What did it involve? What are some details? And what was the outcome? So for this bullet point, I just thought it was a little bit of awkward wording. Conducted equity research doesn't feel like a very organic way to describe this. Of several public companies in the security technology industry, and the purpose was for investor relation updates. I think my main idea was that this is kind of redundant with the first outcome. So if you can think of something a little bit better, like educating senior management or updating the internal evaluation model, something like that that's a little bit different would just potentially lead to more interesting interview. So moving on, this is the second entry. This is when I interned at a software startup. One thing I thought here that this was a little bit of an absurd claim, saying that I increased the product margin by 30% as a summer intern. That seems just a little preposterous. So maybe coming up with something that was more conventional, more believable. For here, if it's an existing term, something like CRM is a very well-known initialism, so I can just use CRM instead of spelling it out completely. For here, it's just a minor consistent units. If I'm going to introduce commas somewhere, then I should be using it for all my numbers. And finally, for the third entry, I've already talked about the CRM work I've done in this previous entry. So I would actually focus more on this other stuff. If it's cold calling, that's a very underrated task that a lot of interns have to do. I'd also love to hear more about this portfolio of investment products. If you mention it, even if you're extremely detached from it, it's useful to kind of know what is in the portfolio. Is it mortgage instruments? Is it bonds? Is it ETFs? Whatever it is, I think that just leads to a more interesting conversation. And the last entry on this resume was my time with the University Investment Fund, known as WIC. And I thought I did a good job of trying to mention numbers wherever possible. I talk about the ROI, I talk about the club budget. What I thought overall, especially because I have stock pitches below, just have one ticker somewhere on your resume so that people can ask you questions about it. It might seem scary because you'll have to kind of prepare for that stock pitch, but I think it can create a lot more upside for your resume. People want to talk about businesses, they want to talk about companies, and if I just mentioned a stock pitch here or even mentioned the ticker that I pitched for this competition, I think that would make this resume a lot more precise. In reading these bullets, I thought it would be actually better to split them up. One more about pitching stocks, one more about the fund itself. I also think it'd be good to mention kind of what the index had done, because in isolation, this doesn't mean a lot. And in reading the bullets, I thought that this one was not as important. It articulates more about, the club management, but I think at this level, it's better to talk about the analysis, about the fundamental kind of valuation that I did. I think my main kind of gripes with the award section is that it's not very precise. It's much better if you can talk about the actual basis of the competition. What did it entail? If you beat a lot of teams, how many teams were it? All these small details really add up. It's a similar comment for interest. If something is truly your interest, you should be able to add 2 or 3 more words. If you're doing creative writing, have you made any submissions? Do you have a blog? Or what substantiates the idea that you've done creative writing? Even if it's something like travel or food, you should be able to mention specifically where you've traveled, where you want to travel, specific trips you've made, things like that just make it a lot more conversational. So there's a fair amount of issues that I found with the resume. Let's take a look of what it looks like with these comments incorporated. So here we are looking at the improved resume, in my opinion. A lot of the core information is very similar, but it just adds a little bit more detail where possible and cleans it up. We have the 2 decimals here. We mentioned the actual portfolio company, which is extremely important for a search fund that only holds one portfolio company. For the portfolio of investment products, I talk about some of the investments that were in that group. For the fund, we talk about the comparable index, what you actually beat it by. That's extremely important whenever talking about fund dynamics. You can also see that the units are made more consistent. See, we have K here, so we have a K for 150,000 here. I think a lot of improvement was made to this section. I've mentioned the specific companies I was working with, or even just articulating what the kind of competition was. For interest, you can also see that I've added a lot more detail, and this adding other small details makes it a more believable resume. I again want to stress to you, I think the most important thing is getting these bullet points right. If you can clearly talk about the work you did, if you can point to specific number outcomes, then you're doing a great job and you're going to have a solid resume. So I hope that was helpful for you. Again, if you want to look at more real-world examples, you can download all my investment banking and private equity resumes from our resume and cover letter course. In that course, we're also going to have a lot more detailed instruction, a resume bullet point bank, and I think it's going to be a big help for you if you don't think your resume is in a good spot. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.